My wife's family used to treat me like I didn't matter, just some nobody, until I started making real money. Then, suddenly, they wanted to erase the prenup. But I made one move that shut them up for good. I was 23 when I met Rachel. I just graduated college and had landed my first IT job in Denver. She was finishing her teaching degree, and we crossed paths at a barbecue one of our mutual friends was throwing. Rachel had this effortless charm, she could make anyone laugh, make everyone feel welcome. I won't lie, I was smitten from the jump. She came from a pretty comfortable background. Her dad owned a couple of car dealerships, and her mom ran a boutique over in Boulder. They weren't rolling in billions or anything, but they had the kind of money that smooths out life's bumps. My family? We were solidly middle class. My dad was an electrician, and my mom worked as a nurse. They raised me and my two brothers in a snug little house, nothing fancy, but it was home. We didn't go hungry, but new clothes and vacations were more, once in a while, than regular things. Rachel and I clicked fast. We started dating, and within a year, I knew I wanted to marry her. I popped the question at this quiet park where we used to spend lazy Sunday afternoons, and she said yes. Everything felt like a dream, well, almost everything. Her parents, especially her father, weren't exactly thrilled. Right from the start, I could tell they didn't think I measured up. They never came right out and said it, but the way they talked down to me, it was all in the undertones. Her dad would throw out lines like, "So, Eric, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or, you know Rachel's used to a certain standard of living." I brushed it off because I loved Rachel, and she always stood in my corner. But then came the prenup talk during the wedding planning. One evening after dinner, her dad asked me into his office. He had that serious, fatherly look on his face like he was about to give me some profound advice. Instead, he handed me this thick stack of legal papers and said, "This is just a formality, Eric. It's to protect Rachel's future. I'm sure you understand." Truth is, I didn't understand, and I definitely didn't like it. I felt like I'd been slapped in the face. Why did they assume I was going to take advantage of her? Sure, I was only making about $40,000 a year, but I had ambition. I had goals. I wanted to build something, not just for myself, but for us. Still, I didn't want to stir the pot. So I took the prenup home and read through it, flipping page after page with this heavy mix of frustration and confusion. It basically said that if we ever split, I'd walk away with nothing but whatever I had personally earned. No piece of her family's money. Nothing she might inherit. It wasn't about us, it was about locking me out. I brought it up with Rachel, hoping she'd be as upset as I was. But instead, she just looked at me and said, "Eric, it's not a big deal. It's just legal stuff. It doesn't mean anything between us." She was calm, but I could tell she was torn, stuck between me and her family. I didn't want to be the guy who made her choose, so I bit my tongue and signed the damn thing. I told myself that it didn't matter because I wasn't marrying her for money. Looking back, that was probably the first time I gave her parents too much control over our relationship. But back then, I truly thought I was doing the noble thing. I figured they'd come around eventually, and that prenup would end up just gathering dust. The wedding itself was gorgeous, but the tension between our families was hard to miss. My brothers and cousins showed up in modest suits, some bought on sale, others borrowed, while her side looked like they'd just stepped out of a country club photo shoot. There wasn't any drama, but the divide was obvious. After the wedding, Rachel and I moved into a small apartment in Denver. She got a job teaching at an elementary school, and I kept grinding away at my IT firm. Those early years were tight but meaningful. We budgeted everything, cooked almost all our meals at home, and saved like our lives depended on it. Her parents would occasionally toss out comments about our frugal lifestyle, but we didn't let it get to us. We were happy. Still, that prenup was always there in the back of my mind. Not because I ever expected to use it, but because of what it represented. It was this quiet little reminder that her family didn't believe in me, not really. Every time her dad made some snide remark about my job or our savings, it hit a nerve. It pushed me to work harder. I wanted to prove him wrong, not just for me, but for Rachel too. But that prenup kept creeping back into our lives. Every now and then, it'd come up casually. Her mom might joke about how smart they were to have made me sign it. Or her dad would talk about protecting the family's assets, acting like it was no big deal. They'd say it with polite smiles, but it always felt like a slap. Still, I stayed quiet. I kept my head down and focused on my goals. I loved my wife, and I wasn't going to let her parents ruin our marriage. I kept telling myself that as long as Rachel and I were solid, the rest didn't matter. But looking back now, I can see how that prenup became more than just some document. It was proof that, in their eyes, I never truly measured up. And over time, that piece of paper became the spark that lit a fire I never saw coming. After a few years of working my tail off in that IT job, things finally started to shift. It wasn't some overnight success story, it was more like small wins stacking up, one after another, until it finally turned into something big. I was 27 when I caught my first real break, but getting there wasn't exactly smooth sailing. I was still grinding it out at the same IT firm in Denver. The pay wasn't terrible, but it wasn't anything to write home about either. I'd been with that company for around 4 years, and honestly, I felt stuck. The job was steady, sure, but it didn't push me, and there wasn't any real chance to climb the ladder. Deep down, I knew that if I wanted more out of life, I'd have to take a leap. That's when Nate, one of my coworkers, started chatting about this freelance gig he was doing on the side, coding for small startups. At first, it sounded a little sketchy to me. I figured he was just burning the candle at both ends and was gonna crash eventually. But then he showed me one of his freelance paychecks, and my jaw practically hit the floor. The guy had made twice what we pulled in from our full-time jobs, just from side work. That flipped a switch in me. I'd always been solid with web development and pretty good at solving problems, so it got me thinking. I started spending my weekends digging deeper, learning new coding languages, playing around with frameworks, and building out small projects just to get sharper. Rachel thought I'd lost my mind. "You're already working full-time," she'd say. "Why are you piling on more?" But I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be something bigger. After about 6 months of late nights and side gigs, I finally landed a client that changed everything. It was a small tech startup that needed someone to build their entire back-end system from the ground up. The money they offered was more than I'd ever seen from a single project. On top of that, they threw in stock options. At first, I didn't know what those were really worth, could have been nothing. But something about their vision made sense to me, so I decided to roll the dice. That next year was one of the hardest and busiest of my life. I was still working my regular job, clocking in 40 hours a week, but every other moment was spent grinding for the startup. Nights, weekends, holidays, you name it. I was glued to my screen. Rachel was supportive, but I could tell she was getting worn down. She missed how things used to be, when I was more present. We had our fair share of little arguments, me missing dinner again, or blowing off movie night because I was chasing a deadline. I'd always say, "Just a little longer, I swear," but deep down, I think we both knew that wasn't true. Then came the big break. That startup got bought out by a larger company, and those stock options I'd taken a gamble on. They shot through the roof. One minute I was worried about how we'd make our next mortgage payment, and the next, I had enough to wipe out our debts and still have a healthy safety net left over. I'll never forget the look on Rachel's face when I told her. She was stunned, in a good way, but also kind of speechless, like she couldn't believe it had actually worked out. That moment changed everything. I walked into work the next week and handed in my resignation. I'd been dreaming of that day for years. My boss didn't take it well, tried to guilt-trip me into staying. "You're one of our top guys, Eric. You really want to throw all this away?" But I was already gone in my mind. I had bigger plans now. First thing I did. I surprised Rachel with a trip to Hawaii. We'd been talking about going for years but never had the cash. That trip was my way of saying, see? I didn't forget about us. It was beautiful, white sand beaches, amazing sunsets, and food that made you forget everything else. But even in paradise, I couldn't stop thinking about what came next. I realized I loved the freedom of working for myself. Being in control, solving new problems, building something from scratch, it was like a drug. That's when I decided to start my own business. I used the money from the acquisition to launch a property management company. I'd always had an interest in real estate, and it seemed like a smart way to grow wealth without chaining myself to a desk. Starting the company wasn't a walk in the park. I had no clue what I was doing at first. There was a mountain of legal stuff, hiring employees, managing properties. But I threw myself into it just like I had with coding. I read everything I could get my hands on, went to workshops, and leaned heavily on a mentor I'd met through freelancing. Little by little, things started coming together. By the time I turned 30, life looked completely different than it had just a few years before. That little property management company I started was actually doing well, way better than I expected. Clients kept rolling in, and I'd put together a solid team to handle the daily grind. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck or wondering how we'd cover the bills. I was stable. I was proud. I figured maybe, just maybe, I'd finally earn some respect from Rachel's family. But what I got instead wasn't exactly respect. It started off subtly. Her dad, Gerald, began calling me for advice on real estate deals. I didn't think much of it at first. "Hey Eric," he'd say, "I'm thinking about picking up a commercial space downtown. What do you think?" I actually appreciated it. I figured he was finally seeing me as someone worth listening to, someone who'd proved himself. But the conversation started shifting. They got more personal. One day, he goes, "You think you'd be willing to invest with me? You know, just to help me get things rolling." Now, part of me wanted to help, he was family, after all. But the deal he described didn't sit right with me. It felt a little shaky. So I politely told him I wasn't in a position to invest at that moment. That's when something changed. He didn't say anything outright, but next time we saw him, his whole vibe was off. Cold, distant, like I'd insulted him somehow. Even Rachel noticed. She asked me if something had happened, and I just shrugged it off. Nah, he's probably just stressed about some business stuff. But deep down, I knew he wasn't thrilled I'd turned him down. And that was just the beginning. Rachel's mom, Linda. She had her own subtle ways of making things uncomfortable. Linda had her own way of making things uncomfortable. She never came out and asked for anything directly, instead, she'd just drop little comments here and there. She'd smile and say things like, "Life's gotten so expensive lately, hasn't it? Especially with Gerald easing into retirement." Then she'd glance at me and add, "You and Rachel are lucky to be in such a strong financial position." That word, lucky, really rubbed me the wrong way. None of this came from luck. It came from grinding, missing sleep, sacrificing weekends, and pushing through burnout. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and kept quiet. I didn't want to start a fight. Then one weekend, things took a different turn. Rachel and I were having dinner at her parents' place. Everything was normal at first, steak on the grill, casual conversation. But partway through the meal, Gerald looked up from his plate and said, "You know, Eric, I've been thinking about that prenup we had you sign when you and Rachel got married." That stopped me cold. I hadn't given that document a single thought in years. As far as I was concerned, it had been a hoop I jumped through to keep the peace, a formality that didn't mean anything anymore. I figured it was ancient history. "What about it?" I asked, trying to stay casual. He cut into his steak and said, well, don't you think it's a little outdated now? I mean, you've done really well for yourself. You've built a great life for Rachel, and I respect that. But doesn't it seem unnecessary to keep that prenup in place anymore? I glanced over at Rachel. She was suddenly very focused on her mashed potatoes, like they held all the answers in the world. That told me everything. I realized she knew this was coming. I don't know, Gerald, I replied carefully. It's never been an issue for us. Why change something that's working just fine? Then Linda jumped in. Things are different now, Eric. When you two got married, we were just trying to protect Rachel's future. But now, you're doing so well. Your family. Family. They always used that word like it was a magic spell, like I was the problem if I didn't bend to their wishes. I looked at Rachel again, hoping she'd speak up, but she stayed silent. That silence cut deeper than anything they said. I honestly don't see a reason to cancel it, I said, keeping my voice calm. It's just sitting in a drawer somewhere. It's not affecting our life. Gerald's smile went stiff. Linda gave Rachel a pointed look, one of those classic do-something glances. But they dropped it, for the moment, anyway. On the drive home, I turned to Rachel. Why didn't you say anything back there? She let out a sigh and stared out the window. Because I don't want to be stuck in the middle, Eric. You know how they are. They just want what's best for me. And what about what's best for us? I asked. This is our marriage, not theirs. The prenup hasn't caused any problems, so why are they obsessed with getting rid of it now? She didn't have much of an answer. Just mumbled, talk to them, okay? Don't let it stress you out. But I did stress about it. A lot. Over the next few weeks, Gerald and Linda kept bringing it up, always framed as a casual chat, like they were just checking in. Meanwhile, Rachel started to get more vocal. You've got nothing to lose by tearing it up, she'd say. But it wasn't about losing something. It was the principle. I started to feel like I was fighting on two fronts, one with her parents, and one with Rachel. And that was hard, because I loved her. But the more this dragged on, the more I felt like I was standing alone. Then came the breaking point. I was at work one afternoon when Linda called. It started out like usual, small talk, how's the business, how's Rachel? But pretty quickly, she pivoted. Eric, I really think you should consider what it looks like, she said. Keeping that prenup in place sends a message. It makes it seem like you don't trust Rachel. That's not fair to her. And that was it. I was done. With all due respect, Linda, I said, keeping my voice firm, this isn't your decision. Rachel and I are fine with how things are. She paused, just for a second. Then she said something I'll never forget. Well, if you're that determined to keep it, I guess we'll just have to see how Rachel feels about that in the long run. She didn't threaten me outright, but it sure felt like a warning. I hung up, fuming. That night, I told Rachel exactly what her mom had said. She didn't even seem shocked. She just said, they're just worried about me, Eric. They mean well. That's when it hit me, this wasn't about a piece of paper. It was about control. Her parents had always steered her life, and now they were trying to steer mine too. Hey everyone, Eric here again. First off, I appreciate all the support and advice. Writing this down has honestly been a wake-up call. It's helped me see the situation more clearly. And hearing from others who've been through something similar. That's been powerful. Here's where things stand now. The pressure hasn't eased up. If anything, it's gotten worse. Rachel's bringing up the prenup more often, and her tone's changed. It's no longer, let's talk about it. Now it's, if you trusted me, you'd get rid of it. We've had a few arguments. The last one hit especially hard. I told her flat out, this isn't about trust, Rachel. This is about your parents trying to control our marriage. She didn't like that one bit. She fired back with, or maybe it's about you not trusting me. What kind of husband keeps something like that in place after all these years? That one stung. I looked at her and said, the prenup hasn't been a problem for years, so why is it suddenly such a big deal now? The only thing that's changed is your parents suddenly seeing dollar signs. She rolled her eyes and called me paranoid, her favorite go-to insult these days. That was the moment I realized we needed to talk, really talk, without all the noise and pressure. So I suggested we get away for a bit, head out to the cabin we used to love. It's a peaceful little place tucked next to the river, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could reset things and finally talk it out, just the two of us, no interference from her parents hovering like storm clouds. Rachel agreed, but you could tell from her body language she wasn't exactly excited. Once we arrived, everything looked the same, quiet, remote, calm, the kind of setting where you can actually think straight. That first evening, we made dinner together. For a while, it felt almost normal. But even then, there was this quiet tension buzzing in the background, like neither of us wanted to be the first to say what we were really thinking. The next morning, I figured it was time to stop dancing around it. We were sitting on the dock, watching the water move, when I finally spoke up. Rachel, I need the truth, what's really going on? Is this about us? Or is this about your parents? I asked. She let out this annoyed sigh, not even trying to hide how irritated she was. Eric, this is about us. My parents don't control how I think. She said she was the one who didn't believe the prenup made sense anymore. But I wasn't buying it. Come on, Rachel. Don't act like your parents haven't been pushing this from the start, I said. They're the ones who made me sign it in the first place. Now they're the ones demanding we tear it up. That's not some random coincidence. She turned to me, her expression dead serious. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like my parents are the bad guys here, when all they're doing is looking out for me. Looking out for you. I shot back. What about us? This isn't their relationship, it's ours. And I'm not about to let them decide how we handle our marriage. And then she hit me with something that made my blood boil. Maybe the problem isn't them, Eric. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're so caught up in your own insecurities that you can't see how unfair this is to me. Insecure? I fired back. You think I'm insecure because I won't tear up a document your parents forced on me? The same document they made me sign because they didn't trust me in the first place. She shrugged like it didn't matter and said, well, if you don't trust me now, maybe we shouldn't be talking about a future at all. That felt like a punch to the chest, but I wasn't going to let her see that. Oh, so now you're threatening to walk out because I won't cave to your parents' demands? Real mature, Rachel. It's not a threat, she said coldly. It's just reality. If you're this obsessed with the prenup, maybe you don't even see me as a real partner. Maybe you're just waiting for me to mess up so you can walk away with everything. That was it. I stood up, looked her straight in the eye, and said, don't twist this around like I'm the bad guy. I've busted my ass building this life, and I did it without a dime from your parents. If anyone should be questioning loyalty here, it's me. She didn't say a word. Just stared at me while I turned around and headed back to the cabin to cool off. The rest of the trip went downhill fast. We barely talked, and when we did, it was tense and clipped. By the time we packed up and hit the road back home, it was obvious, we weren't on the same page anymore. I've got my first therapy session coming up this week, and I'm hoping it helps me sort through the mess in my head. Right now, it feels like I'm standing in a minefield, trying not to set off the wrong step. I love Rachel, I really do, but this whole situation is making me question a lot. Everything blew up last Wednesday. I walked through the door and found Rachel's entire family waiting in my living room. Her parents, her sister Emily, and Rachel herself, sitting there like they were about to stage some kind of intervention. The moment I stepped inside, Gerald started in. Eric, we've all talked, and it's time to settle this prenup. It's ripping the family apart, and we can't keep going like this. I stared at him in disbelief. We? I asked. Last I checked, this was my marriage, not some group decision. I glanced over at Rachel, hoping she'd say something, calm the storm, but she just sat there, staring down at her shoes. Look, I said, trying hard to keep my voice steady, I've already made my stance clear. The prenup stays. End of discussion. Then Linda jumped in. Eric, you're being unreasonable. Rachel's put her whole heart into this marriage, and you're treating her like she's disposable. Disposable? I repeated, stunned. I've spent years building our life, while constantly dealing with your interference. No offense, Linda, but this isn't your business. This is between me and Rachel. She didn't let up. It becomes our business when it starts affecting the whole family. If you really cared about Rachel, you'd see how much this prenup is hurting her. Before I could respond, Gerald dropped a line that made the air in the room go cold. You're not the only one with options, Eric. Rachel deserves to be protected. And if you can't understand that, maybe your marriage isn't as solid as you think it is. It felt like a warning, and I wasn't about to let it slide. Wait, are you seriously implying that my marriage depends on me destroying a legal agreement that your family forced on me in the first place? I said. You've got some nerve, Gerald. After that, the room fell completely silent. I noticed Emily, Rachel's younger sister, shifting in her seat like she wanted to disappear. She always seemed like the quiet one in that family, never fully part of their drama. Kind of shy, always on the edges of things. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But looking back, I should have realized something wasn't right. Eventually, I'd had enough. I told them all to leave. I wasn't about to sit there and let them gang up on me in my own house. Rachel stuck around, and what followed was one of the ugliest fights we've ever had. She called me selfish and hard-headed. I told her I was sick of being treated like an ATM by her and her parents. The shouting just kept building until she grabbed her things and stormed out, saying she was going to stay with her folks for a few days. I didn't try to stop her. The next day, I got a call from Emily, totally unexpected, since we never really talked outside of holidays or birthdays. Her voice was shaky, and she asked if we could meet in person. I said sure, assuming maybe she wanted to apologize for the awkward ambush at my house or explain what the hell that was all about. We met at a small coffee shop, and right away I could see something was off. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days, and she kept glancing around nervously like she was afraid someone might spot her. After a bit of silence, she finally leaned in and said, Eric, I overheard something the other night. And you really need to hear it. What she told me felt like a sucker punch. Apparently, Rachel and her parents had been scheming behind my back for a while. Emily had overheard a conversation during a family dinner when they thought she wasn't around. They were saying Rachel can't leave you until the prenup is gone, she told me, barely holding it together. They said it's the only way she'll get what she deserves. I just sat there stunned. Leave me? Why would she even be thinking about that? Emily hesitated for a second, then dropped the real bomb. Because she's been seeing someone else, she said. And yeah, her parents know all about it. They're pushing to kill the prenup because if she divorces you with it still in place, she walks away with nothing. It felt like the floor had vanished under me. I asked Emily if she was sure, and she nodded slowly. I didn't want to believe it either, Eric, she said, but I heard everything. They even talked about how to spin the story so you'd come out looking like the bad guy. I sat there, trying to wrap my head around it all. Emily looked genuinely upset, and I could tell, she wasn't lying. I finally asked, why are you telling me this? She let out a heavy breath. Because it's wrong, Eric. You've always been decent to me. You don't deserve this. And I don't want to be part of their scheme. I thanked her, told her I'd keep her name out of it, and watched her walk away. After that, I just sat there, numb, replaying everything in my mind, the late nights at the office, the constant prenup arguments, the shift in Rachel's attitude. Now it all made sense. When I got home, I started digging through our joint finances. I needed answers, and fast. And sure enough, I found charges I didn't recognize, fancy restaurants, hotel bookings, even a couple of transactions from jewelry stores. I haven't confronted Rachel yet. I'm still gathering everything. I called up my lawyer, told them the whole story. Their advice? Stay calm, stay focused, and don't rush into anything. Easier said than done. Right now, I'm trying to figure out my next move. This kind of betrayal, it cuts deep. I never imagined I'd be in a situation like this. But one thing I do know, that prenup isn't going anywhere. And neither is my self-respect. My lawyer and I got right to work. Between the proof of cheating, the suspicious charges, and her parents' shady involvement, building the case was almost too easy. The divorce process? Honestly, it was smoother than I expected. When I finally confronted Rachel, she didn't even bother denying it. She broke down crying, went full drama mode, and tried every excuse in the book. I felt so alone while you were working all the time, she sobbed. You cared more about your job than me. Yeah, I wasn't buying it. I looked her dead in the eye and said, you don't get to blame me for the choices you made. I was out there working my tail off to build the kind of life people only dream about. And you just threw it away. She tried to push back, well, maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. That one stung, but I didn't show it. I just said, you didn't have to do anything. You made a choice, and now you live with it. And when I told her I'd already filed for divorce, her face went pale. She tried acting shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd actually follow through. Then came the begging, we can fix this, Eric. We can go to therapy. Start over. I'll do whatever it takes. But I wasn't having it. There's nothing left to fix, I told her. The trust is gone, and nothing you say is going to change what you did. Your actions spoke loud and clear. Now, about that prenup. Man, that thing turned out to be a lifesaver. Ironclad and airtight, thanks to her own family's insistence back when we got married. Rachel walked away with absolutely nothing. Not a dime of what I'd earned, no spousal support, no split of the assets, nothing. And with her cheating on record, she didn't even have a legal leg to stand on. Her parents? Oh, they were livid. Linda blew up my phone with voicemail after voicemail, each one more dramatic than the last. Long, drawn-out rants about how I was destroying Rachel's life and how I needed to be the bigger person. Can you believe the nerve? I didn't respond to a single one. My lawyer told me to document everything just in case they tried to pull something. Luckily, once they realized they had zero leverage, they backed off pretty quick. Not long after, I found out what was really driving their sudden push to get rid of the prenup. Turns out, Gerald and Linda weren't nearly as financially secure as they made themselves out to be. Their businesses had been tanking for years, bleeding money left and right. That flashy lifestyle they loved to show off. Total illusion. When Rachel moved back into their house, the cracks started to show. She went from living in our beautiful home to crashing in her old childhood bedroom. No more designer clothes, no more weekly spa visits, no more fancy dinners at trendy places. From what I've heard, they're all scrambling to keep up appearances, but that house of cards is shaking, and it's only a matter of time before it all collapses. And let's not forget the guy she was seeing, the one she thought she'd ride off into the sunset with. Yeah, he ghosted her the second things got real. Emily told me he was one of those smooth-talking serial daters. Never planned on settling down, just used Rachel for the thrill. And when he realized she no longer had access to my money, he bailed. Just vanished. So there she was, no job, no money, and back under her parents' roof, who couldn't support her the way they used to. Talk about karma. I figured that was the end of it. But of course, Rachel wasn't done. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, she showed up at my office. Uninvited. My assistant tried to block her, but Rachel shoved her way in. She looked rough, hair a mess, clothes wrinkled and tired, eyes red like she hadn't slept. She stood there with tears running down her face and said, "Eric, I messed up. Please. I need you to forgive me." I leaned back in my chair, just looking at her. Part of me wanted to laugh at how bold she was, but mostly I felt nothing. "Rachel," I said, "we've been over this. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of choices that wrecked our marriage. Forgiveness doesn't change that." She tried every angle, blaming her parents, crying, promising to change, even hinting that maybe we could start fresh. "We can fix this, Eric. I'll do whatever it takes. Let's just try again." But that ship had sailed. "Rachel," I said, "you didn't just cheat. You were plotting to leave me and take what I worked my ass off for. That's not love. That's betrayal. And I can't forgive that." When she realized I wasn't going to cave, the tears stopped and the anger kicked in. "You're going to regret this, Eric," she snapped. "One day, you'll realize you pushed away the only person who ever really cared about you." I just shook my head. "You didn't care about me," I told her. "You cared about the lifestyle I gave you. Now you get to figure it out on your own." Then I called security to walk her out. That was the last time I ever saw her. Since then, life's been quieter, simpler, and a hell of a lot more peaceful. Emily and I still keep in touch. She apologized again for her family's mess, but honestly, she didn't have to. She was the only one with enough integrity to speak up when it counted. I'll always respect her for that. As for Rachel and her parents, word is things keep going downhill financially. Part of me feels bad for Emily, she's caught in the middle, but the rest of them? They made their choices. Now they can deal with the consequences. If there's one lesson I've taken from all of this, it's this: stand your ground. People will try to use you, guilt you, make you feel like you owe them something. But you don't. You've got to protect your peace, your dignity, and everything you've worked for. And to anyone out there dealing with manipulative in-laws, a partner who's two-faced, or a situation that doesn't sit right in your gut, trust that feeling. Speak up. Walk away if you have to. It's not easy, but it's always worth it.